Hey folks, hope you all are doing well. I'm Karan Bandal from Econosite, your weekly wrap on economic news from India and around the world. So let's get started with taxes. India's gross direct tax mop-up grows. CBDT, Central Board of Direct Taxes, reported tax collection numbers recently. Government budget had estimated direct tax collection of 14.2 lakh crore rupees for this fiscal year, and so far actual gross direct tax collection has grown by 26% to 13.6 lakh crore. You take tax refunds out of this number and you get net direct tax collection at 11.3 lakh crore rupees, which is roughly 80% of the target. There are still about 3.5 months left in the current fiscal year, so we may see actual direct tax collection exceeding the target. What does this mean? Well, direct tax collection consists of corporate income tax that companies pay on their profit and personal income tax that individuals like you and I pay on our earnings or salaries. This robust tax collection trend indicates that the formal economy has rebounded from the pandemic lows, with both companies and individuals seeing a rise in their earnings. In short, on the ground, at least the formal economy is feeling the benefits of economic growth. I also looked up the trend in indirect taxes, primarily GST, goods and services tax. So far this fiscal year, monthly GST collection is averaging at roughly 1.48 lakh crore rupees. So, for the full fiscal year, total GST collection should come in at around 17.8 lakh crore, meaning total direct plus indirect tax collection for the full fiscal year should come in at roughly 32 lakh crore rupees or roughly $390 billion at least. Moving on. In our previous updates, we talked about manufacturing companies moving from China to India because of US China geopolitical tussle and China's stringent zero COVID policy. But an article came out in the South China Morning Post stating that Apple moving production from China to India is not due to China's zero COVID protests. Dr. Xiaoshan Li, CEO of Percept Lane, writes that to understand Apple's move to India, one needs to look at demographics and GDP growth trend. China has participated in the global supply chain since entering the World Trade Organization in 2001. At the time, median age of China's population was 28.9. Today, it is 38.4. China's GDP growth rate in 2001 was 8.3%. This year, it will be 2.7%. Now, keep these numbers in mind. Apple started moving manufacturing to China in mid 2000s. Young Chinese population then provided ample supply of labor at low cost and high efficiency, helping Apple establish China as highly cost efficient production base for Apple products. Then around 2009, Apple began marketing the iPhones locally in China because rapidly growing China's GDP meant Apple getting access to a major consumer market. This created a virtuous cycle for Apple where it was manufacturing more in China, selling more in China, and exporting more from China. Dr. Lee points out that India today looks a lot like China did in 2001. Current median age of India's population is 28.4. India's GDP growth for 2021 was 8.9% and will remain elevated in the near future. China is running out of demographic steam, but India has just begun. Also, current Indian administration has done a decent job in attracting FDI, that is foreign direct investment, meaning government policies are supportive of boosting domestic manufacturing. And Apple may just be looking to replicate their China playbook in India. After all, Apple is not the only company to move manufacturing in India. South Korea's Samsung is considering designating India as its primary overseas base for smartphone manufacturing. Even China's Xiaomi has ramped up its manufacturing in India. Dr. Lee does have a point, but I still assess that US-China relations and China's zero COVID policy has a lot to do with so many high profile companies starting to move part of their setup out of China. Okay. Continuing on the same theme, mobile exports from India are skyrocketing. We see that the global economy has started to slow down, and in line with that, India's exports in many sectors have slid or at best stagnated. But electronics sector is a different story. Historically, electronics sector was never a prolific export segment for India. In fact, till 2018, electronics was India's 10th largest export segment. Since 2014, when Mr. Modi's BJP came into power, they have been trying to boost exports without any meaningful progress. Then several developments came together after the pandemic that happened to be in India's favor. Number 1, India launched 14 PLI schemes, that is production linked incentive schemes, since April 2020, aimed at attracting foreign companies to set up manufacturing base in India. Number 2, US China trade relations soured significantly post pandemic. And number 3, China's zero COVID policy crippled companies in the West that rely heavily on Chinese manufacturing. Naturally, these companies began looking for alternatives. Samsung and Apple vendors Foxconn, Pegatron and Wistron are participants in the smartphone PLI schemes announced by the government. What does all this mean for India's exports? Well, during the last fiscal year ending on March 2022, India exported roughly $5.4 billion worth of smartphones. And so far this fiscal year, between April to November, that is in just 8 months during this fiscal year, India has already exported roughly $6 billion worth of smartphones. With average exports per month at $1 billion, it is highly likely that India's smartphone exports will double during this fiscal year to more than $10 billion. This explosive growth in smartphone exports has propelled electronics segment to 6th largest export segment for India. Experts now recommend that PLI schemes focused on components need to be launched that will aid in rapidly increasing value addition by expanding the local components manufacturing ecosystem. Let's continue on this import-export topic. International trade. Internationalization of Indian Rupaya in the offing. International trade takes place in major currencies like the US dollar, British pound, Japanese yen and so on. With US dollar being the dominant one, it is the world's reserve currency and US benefits tremendously as a result. We are seeing efforts by the current Indian dispensation to insert Indian Rupaya into this global trade currency basket. To make it work, India's central bank, that is Reserve Bank of India, has come up with an international rupee settlement mechanism. Foreign countries can open special rupee accounts with partner banks in India. These special accounts are called Vostro accounts. These Vostro accounts will then be used to settle trade between the two countries in Indian rupees. So far, RBI has approved 12 Vostro for trade in rupee with Russia, 5 for trade with Sri Lanka and 1 for trade with Mauritius. Tajikistan, Cuba, Luxembourg and Sudan have begun talking to India about using this mechanism. The government is strategically focusing on countries that are short of dollars to bring into this mechanism, and right now a very large number of countries fall into this category. The two countries that India is eager to bring under rupee trade settlement are UAE and Saudi Arabia, its key oil suppliers, and the talks between them are ongoing. This is important because India imports roughly $120 billion plus worth of oil every year. If India can settle major part of this trade in a currency controlled by the RBI, imagine the pressure it will relieve from India's foreign exchange reserve. So, internationalization of an Indian Rupaya has begun. It is at a nascent stage, but I would not be surprised if 10 years down the line, Indian Rupaya acquires the stature of one of the major global trade currencies. In summary, India's economic growth numbers are good. We are seeing a rise in incomes for both individuals and companies that translates to robust tax collections. India's exports are moderating in line with a slowing world economy, but electronics exports are on a tear. And as Dr. Lee points out, this may just be the beginning. There is a long runway for growth in India's electronics manufacturing and exports. And as India increasingly integrates itself with the global supply chains, the policy makers very prudently are making an effort to add Indian currency in the global currency basket. I hope you enjoyed this week's wrap. I will speak with you again after a break of 1 week. Until then, happy holidays and take care.